Fantastic. Great, great. Hello,
Hello.
hello, Emily. Where are you calling from? Where are you?
I'm calling from New York Live Arts.
Oh, okay. Time and space, our friend, right? Emily, if we were to kick it off by me saying, Happy Indigenous Peoples Day.
Yeah.
What do you feel when I say that?
Well, I have to say, I was doing a bunch of appointments today, walking around, and I ran into a fucking Columbus fucking Day parade. And
oh no!
Here I am wearing this shirt, which I don't know if it's backwards on there, but says no colonizers. And then my mask says you are on Indigenous land. So this is what I was wearing as I ran into that parade. And, I had this flush of like, there was a little ship that they had on the ground and all these flags and all this, like I had this like wave of like hot energy that was just like, I got a little sick in my stomach, I would say. But I walked into a bodega and the person there at the bodega was like, Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. And I was like, you're right, let's separate. And we just had a hilarious back and forth exchange. And so that helped to bolster my feelings a little bit. Yeah, because Indigenous Peoples Day, it's today, it's yesterday, it's tomorrow, it's every day.
It's every day. It's every day. Yes. Toni Morrison I'm very proud to say I was more than an acquaintance, a friend. And I remember her saying back in the day to me, when I get interviewed, people asking me questions, they should be asking anthropologists. I'm a novelist, she said. Now, Emily Johson is a different creature. How do you feel about that? Are people always talking to you as an anthropologist, or?
It's interesting. I guess people, not as an anthropologist certainly, but I think people want to. It's different, right? I think a lot of folks who I work with who are settlers want to know answers, want to know what they can do right away, want to get better at being allies, or they want to get good at becoming accomplices. And I think that we need, I believe that we need accomplices, and that we can get a lot of good work done when we have some good accomplices who are pushing in their realms of power and are undoing the systems that need undoing in the areas that they have the power to do that. I do believe that we need that, or that is helpful along our path toward land back, toward abolition. But that folks want the answer right away, I think that's a bit fun. I think that's a bit funny. I do like to engage with that question, and I do like with First Nations Performing Arts and my colleague Ronnie Pinoy, we taught, and New York Live Arts was part of it. We were part of a decolonization track for 8 months of last year with a bunch of settler-run organizations and presenters and folks who were really engaged in a deep unlearning and learning process toward decolonization, which, as we know, is a process that is going to be a long one, right? And so stepping into that work takes a big commitment and takes a lot of undoing. And so, the question about what can I do? There's not an immediate answer. I don't necessarily always think.
I think the activist part is good. And thank you for that. Yeah. However, I'm going to take you to a place that you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. You remember there was a time, our ages are quite different, but there was a time when people said, look, man, if you want to do politics, you do politics. If you're making art, you make art, right? Where are you at right now on that question of aesthetics of art, as opposed to raising consciousness, fighting a huge historical battle? Where are you at?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever told you this story, though, but when I didn't grow up dancing. I grew up doing athletics and different things growing up where I grew up.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Alaska. on Dena'ina land in Alaska.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time in the woods, and I spent a lot of time hunting and fishing and with my family. And then in school, I did sports. Mm-hmm. And when I got to college and I went to Minnesota Makoche, University of Minnesota, I started dancing. And one of the first performance pieces that I ever saw, maybe, I can't remember exactly, second or third year of school, starting dancing, was Still Here.
Ah, uh-huh.
So I see this work, and I was deeply moved by that work, and I was deeply captivated by that work. And I'm a new, very, very new dancer. I came from basketball and long distance running. Here I'm trying to learn, the improvisation and modern dance and ballet and all of the things that we get taught in school. And I see your work. And then that article by Arlene comes out, right? That in my shorthand and in my memory, was saying, oh, you can't really make work like this because the subject is too important. And I remember being in my class, and I think I wrote like a really heated essay about that. I was like, you can make work about anything. You have to make work about what is vital in the world, what is like present in the world, the things that people need to chew on and need to digest in different ways. And we body activators need to be engaged in those processes because we have a different kind of understanding, a different way of sharing knowledge, or even sharing questions, not even sharing knowledge, right? That was a big influence on me, I think, and I think of that now too. We need to, I think, make work about everything and anything. And to me, there is no, this is just my choice. There is no separation between the work that I make and the active ways in which that is a part of decolonization.
Now, may I say, in other words, what I'm hearing is there's no difference between aesthetics and activism.
Yeah, I think so. Like even with this work, Shore, that we did at New York Live Arts, when was that? 15, 16? That in that work, there was a performance that happened on stage. There was 2 days of volunteer works in the city. There was a day of storytelling. There was a feast. And those days, like, we partnered with Rockaway Waterfront Alliance, I think, was one of the partners. There were like 20 different community partners in that project.
Well, weren't you seeding oysters or something on Long Island?
Yeah. And we were working with oysters out on Governor's Island. And then in the far Rockaways, we were planting dunes and bushes, we were planting bushes and trees on a dune that had been hit by Hurricane Sandy, not too long before. And so we were out there with kids and folks from the Rockaways, and I had been working with them for months leading up to the day, to plan the day and to organize the day together. And the young ones in that group really led that day. But in my mind, that's just an example that, like, planting all of those bushes and those trees that you can still go and visit now today is a real action, right? It has a real action, it has real effect, it has real resonance. And also performing on a stage is real action, it has real resonance, it has real effect. And to me, there is no difference.
Well, the way you use the word real for such a world of, well, let me speak. I'm born in 52. We were born into a world alienated. Now, you don't seem to have the usual burden. Maybe it's no longer usual because there's a great sincerity in what people do right now. But our forebears, the people who were working in the 50s, 40s, 50s, there was this attitude that life, there was no recognizable reality. We did not have to, there was no moral universe. It was all subjective. And many artists felt that, well, I myself am saying art is participation in the world of ideas, or art does for me what religion traditionally did, organizes a seemingly chaotic universe. Now, you came into this already with your marching orders very clear. Have you had your own bouts with there is no meaning in this world? There are these sort of things. How do you feel about that?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think that that's good. I think it's always good to ponder the path that you are on and to try to to try to, you know, continue to understand why you are on a certain path, and to see if that is still the one, and to figure out how to make that clearer if that is the way, right? And so yes, I have in the past a little bit more. When I was a bit younger, I had a lot more maybe worry about whether what I was doing was, you know, enough, with some quotes around that word, enough. I thought that I could be, I could do many other professions that maybe would have an impact on the world in a good way, you know. And but my mother, when I decided to start to study dance and to start to,
what was her name? What was your mom's name?
My mom's name is Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen. Yeah. My mom, she. When I told her I was going to change my major and to, you know, way back in college, and just start to make dance, or to be in this dance world, she said, "Good, the world needs more artists."
Oh, she said that.
She did. She said that. She said that.
Good for her.
I really like, and I think that was a good little lesson, a good little teaching, right? And I call upon that still sometimes. But especially back in those early days when the doubt is more present, you know. I don't know how it is for you, like moving forward. I have less doubt. I know that what I'm doing is all that I want to do, and all that I, you know, of course I want to, the thing I always want to do is I want to root my work deeper and with more people, you know. So that's and so that will continue, and how that continues will maybe change and morph and grow. But I know that this is where I want to be, working with other land defenders, working with people who are working toward justice, people who are like, you know, who in whatever areas of work and in whatever geographies they live in, that is our call. And so that's our call together, and we get stronger when we're working together in this constellatory, as my friend Karen calls it, in this constellatory network.
Well, I want to pick up on Mary Ellen's lovely statement, the world needs more artists, because, you know, I've always felt, I even say it maybe to be just provocative, but I say the world doesn't need another hungry artist, and they let you know at every turn of the clock. What was arts in Alaska? What was your family? I don't know if this is offensive. Were your parents middle class people? Were they educated people? What was art like in your childhood? What was it?
Yeah. You know, I think back to that too, and the things I remember. So I grew up on Denina land. I'm Yupik on my father's side. And I grew up near my grandma, my dad's mother, who is very much the matriarch of our family. And we didn't grow up on I didn't grow up on Yupik homeland. My dad did, but I grew up south and east of there. But my grandma owned a bar growing up, and in this bar, this was a long time ago. So in this bar, there were lots of people all the time. And it was like a really real roadside bar in rural Alaska. And so it was full of characters. It was full of lots of strangers often. And it was also full of family all the time. Because my grandma lived there as well, like lived in the back room of the bar, right? And then the bar itself also had like Scrabble and a pool table and a dance floor and a wood stove and plants, because it was also the home. So it was this interesting mix of activity. And as family, we were there doing family things, eating together and cooking food together. And that's where we would, after harvesting our fish, that's where we would cut our fish up on the fish cleaning hill and dry our fish. And there was a 3-story smokehouse. And that's where like all of our hunting and fishing like times like gathered and ended, you know? So it was a very important place. That's what the thank you bar was about, that piece. But it was a very important place. And so what I remember most about art in my family was stories, right? So there were stories always around with the hunting and with the fishing and with the fires. And there were also all these characters at this bar. Some of them, you know, well on in a couple drinks most of the time, right? And so there was a lot of stuff that I was like privy to that maybe wasn't appropriate, right, for a certain age, and a lot of stuff that I just kind of witnessed and saw, and kind of like maybe started to make my own stories around these characters. And not all of it was pleasant, let me tell you, that is for sure.
Sure.
And I don't know. I think that this like it was a gathering place. It was a gathering, and maybe that's the art that came from my. Yeah.
So in other words, you lived in a milieu that was creative and searching, which is what we want about art, right? Yeah. Your title is so provocative and kind of elliptical. Future being, future being. Do you want to speak to that title, or what's going on in that title?
A couple things. When those words kind of entered into my mind, this was before the pandemic, but for about a decade prior to the pandemic, I've been working with communities of folks around and with the questions, what do you want for your well-being, and the well-being for your chosen friends and family, and your, the place that you live and your world. And these answers have grown into many other projects, including being what is inscribed on these 84 quilts that were the house for a piece we did on Randall's Island in 2017, Then a Cunning Voice and a Night We Spend Gazing at Stars. And so anyway, a decade of like thinking about the future with people and communities of folks from all over what is currently called the US and Australia and Canada and other places. And to me, when I see all of those ideas on Post-its on a wall or on a quilt, it's very attainable, right? Like, right, there's maybe a lot of calls for justice, right? There's a lot of calls for peace. There's also calls from young kids for like ice cream for breakfast, right? So you look at all of these, like what you want for your well-being, and you're like, yes, we can make that happen. We should. Why, as people and as these communities of people, we can make these things happen. And it was some point in 2019 that I just thought that we need that future now. We need to be in it now. And I think some things have come into my understanding as I've been making Being Future Being, which is partly, yes, conjuring that future that you want, conjuring that future that is just in the present. And how do you do that? So the dancers in Being Future Being, they orient their cells to justice, right? Every single cell in their body, they orient to justice. And how do we do that? And as we practice doing that, maybe we start to really conjure that. It's like a technology. It's kind of like a figuring out as we're making it and as we're performing it, I think. And we deserve that, right? We deserve that future that our ancestors want for us. We deserve that. We deserve to make that future that our coming generations will have that is better than the
so being future being, in other words, being what our ancestors would want for us, and that we want for our ancestors, our future people, right? I was thinking about that. You were in the beautiful blurb that came out of the press release that Tyler and other people here at New York Live Arts have made. They use the term social architecture. Now, I wonder, you listed it with the design elements, you listed it with media, you listed it with sound, and then social architecture is actually a material for you. What do you mean by social architecture, and how does that work?
So what we were talking about a little bit ago about resonance or about real action, right? So particularly with Being Future Being, I'm trying to think about how can this gathering, this moment that we have together with audience, with performers, with orienting ourselves to justice, with what is exchanged and shared in this moment, what could be a real resonance forward that could activate and could be supportive of local land rematriative efforts, right? That could be supportive of land back, that could be supportive of justice. So rather than just leave a gathering and not continue, how might we continue? And this again is a question, right? So how do we build some sort of architecture? I've been calling it an architecture of the overflow. So the overflow from the performance, what is that architecture? Is it built? Is it spiritual? Is it energy? Is it, you know, it can be many things. It's probably all of those things. And Ivy Castellanos is somebody who works very particularly thinking about that. And they work as interconnector with Being Future Being. So to try to build relationships with the people who are leading the land back and land rematriative efforts, and to think about how we can support this architecture of the overflow, how we can support this overflow and stay in relationship and stay in continuance with one another, because the world wants to silo our efforts, right? They want to silo, you know, the effort to all efforts. They want to keep us all separate from one another so that our actions don't grow together. And what we need to do, I think, is grow together. Right. And
so does that mean that you see a relationship to African Americans wanting reparations? Yes. You see there's something, help me with that, because I had the feeling when you say settlers, I think you don't give the descendants of Black slaves a pass. We're also settlers in your mind. So you want to talk about, we really are, or do you guys have, you people have you go first, you know, because there are African Americans I know who say to me, I feel for my indigenous brothers and sisters, but let's face it, man, we got to get our shit together. But so how does that work for you?
So just what I was just talking about with silos. I mean, I think we need to build our pathways in solidarity, right? Reparations, I think, is different than land back. That's one viewpoint, right? Reparations are owed, are due, are needed, are necessary, are late. And back is owed, is needed, is necessary, is due, is late, you know? And I think of a future where, and that future is now, right? That future is here, where, all right, what and how do the settler-run organizations start to build reparations and land back and social justice to all folks who have been marginalized? How do they build that into the continuance of their process? And if they don't, and if they can't, they probably don't need to exist anymore, because that just means that they are replicating the white supremacy thoughts and ideals that are holding them up. They need to actively really redistribute and really change every single thing about how they acquire wealth, how they acquire resources, how they share it, their marketing, their languaging, their programming, everything, right? And of course, I am mostly working with and in touch with arts and culture-based institutions. And so that's the area that I think of mostly when I'm thinking this way. Yeah.
You want to give me, I mean, I remember back, we were working with Justin Vivian Bond around the question of how trans people are changing the way we actually communicate with each other because of issues of pronouns and so on. But so I don't want to sound like a complete Pollyanna, but you want to give us the elevator version of, what do you mean land back? What is land back? You say it's not exactly reparations. It's different than reparations. What is land back for the uninitiated?
Land back specifically is many, many things. Right now, it's many, many things, right? It is transfer of title. It is transfer of title, absolutely. If you have land, if you have buildings, if you have wealth, who do you give that back to? It is also, takes many other forms right now. I think it takes forms of access. It takes forms of shift of power. Land back is, I think, a multitude of processes that are very real, and I think the reason that there are multiple spheres of land back right now is because it does need to be activated right now. And so I think as we are working toward what is the goal of land back, which means that, so I am always forgetting the number of, there's over 500, 572, 76, 62, I'm always forgetting the exact number of federally recognized indigenous nations in what is called the United States. There are also other non-recognized, federally recognized nations and groups and sovereign nations of people in what is currently called the US. What I imagine this future is that these lands are working in and with those justice systems, those matriarch-led systems, right? That we are working with and for a future that is abundant, with and for a future that is indigenous, with and for a future that is in solidarity with again, as I've already said, everyone who the white power supremacy has marginalized and has kept in a certain area of wealth, of power, of erasure of everything. And that of course that includes the beings that are more than human, our kin, the trees and the plant and the water and the land, life, a way of living that is very, very different than the way that we currently live.
So it sounds immense, important, and urgent. So climate justice, for instance, ecology, the women, the plight of women, the retreat of democracy, all these ideas, and your work encompasses all of those things. Is that true? Climate justice, for instance. Yeah. How does that work with what you were just saying about your siblings, I suppose, the trees, the animals, and so on? Yeah. How does that work?
Yeah. There is no climate justice without indigenous-led climate justice and resistances. I am a land defender and a water protector, and there are places and times that I've been called to be, and also that is also something that I commit to every day, in the ways that I can in the geographies that I'm in, and I guess in that moment when I say I think that's an understanding. When you are a land defender and a water protector, that is who you are in your everyday. Sometimes we are on the front lines, and sometimes those front lines change, and there are always multiple front lines. And particularly here, in Lenape-Hill-King, in New York City, we've been fighting to protect 1,000 trees and 50 acres on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. We've been on that front line for a little bit over a year. The city is cutting down more than 1,000 trees and bulldozing 50 acres in a land grab on stolen land. They've already cut down 700 trees. There are 505 trees left to protect. And that is certainly a call. That is certainly a call that the architecture of the overflow, right, wants to support. How can we get more folks who live in New York, more folks who live in the surrounding areas, more folks who are far away, to understand that this process of defending this land is vital. We have to understand and think about land back being in the cities too. And we have to think about how protection efforts and how this guise that, oh, this is New York, this is what happens, this gets torn down and something gets built up. There are not going to be 100-year-old trees on the island of Manhattan for much longer. And they just cut down almost 700.
Yes.
That's not a path to a good future. That is not a path to a good future. We do need resiliency. We need resiliency plans, but what we need indigenous folks involved in what resiliency is. We need real future thinking engineers and architects who are working with water that is rising, working with land. We need a shift of how capitalism, right now, capitalism is what is, and real estate is, or what is driving the destruction on the Lower East Side. Is that a pathway to the future? That's not a pathway to the future. That's a pathway into continued destruction. They started that destruction at a sacred site, at a massacre site of Lenape people. That was a massacre that was committed in 1643. They started cutting down trees at that site. What I know from research with the TIPO, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer at Stockbridge, Muncie, and some other folks who did some research last summer, is that the city of New York has not done due diligence in geolocating sacred sites. So they're actively harming a sacred site, and they don't know the specifics of where and where they should not be desecrating, right?
Yeah.
So talk about interrelated. This is always all interrelated, and it's very clear.
Interrelated or intersectional?
Both.
Yes. Very diplomatic.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we only have a little while left. I wonder if we can dig into. I always try to conduct these talks as if someone has never seen your work and what have you. Now, your work is like the quilt you talked about. There's so many dimensions, and it's all. I mean, one piece leads to another piece. But you want to talk about the structure?
Yeah. So being future being is three parts. There's being future being land celestial, which happens around trees and with in collaboration with trees. And there's being future being inside outwards that happens more or less on the stage. And then there's being future being underneath that isn't happening here in Lenapehoking. But being future being land celestial is an activation, is an encouragement, is a gathering of audience with performers and trees as collaborators. We through COVID, I was working with a collaborator, Karen Recollet, and we've been hosting fires on the Lower East Side for about 4 years. And in those fires, those fire gatherings, we think of and relate with the fire as kin, the fire as a sibling, the fire as a collaborator. And of course, that means we're trying to understand what that means. Through COVID, when I was in my apartment and there's one tree that I can see, that became a very clear and dear friend and collaborator with me, with Karen. And we started to think about being future being and a process of collaborating with more than human kin and a way to try to share that with audiences. And so, Land Celestial brings audiences with and to 3 different trees. Fire tree and sound tree and protect tree, and the performers are there in collaboration with the tree, and the audience kind of has a different experience with and amongst each of these more than human kin and the performance that unfolds through the 3 activations.
Are we instructed, will the audience be invited or prompted to move, to chant, to what is it? Or should I just wait to find out?
A little bit of both, but it's a little bit different with each tree. So at one tree, you'll see myself and my collaborator, Sugar Vendel, and the tree that we are working with. And I share a story and we share movement and we also share sound. I have Raven Chacon made the sound score, and I have microphones that kind of pull sound from the ground, and Sugar, who's also a musician and composer, has sound that kind of gathers sound from the tree. At another tree, you are kind of shared more explicitly a little bit about the collaboration. That's where you'll meet Ashley Pierre-Louis. And at that tree, you'll be invited to move around the outer circumference of the tree. And Ashley will share a little bit about why we came to that being a real intricate way to understand the full beingness of the tree. So audiences are invited to experience that. And then at Protect Tree, you'll see Stacy Lynn Smith and a quilt being. And that one, you're just invited to witness. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Now, are we forcing you to bring this elemental free thing indoors to a theater? What's the theater? How do you feel about the theater? And what should we expect in the theater?
Yeah, no, Being Future Being always meant to have a theater-based element as well. Some of my work does not, but Being Future Being wanted to be on the stage as well. But partly, you know, to be honest, that is to resist it. You know, when we're stomping, when we're dancing, when we're moving, we're thinking of the ground underneath. We're thinking of the soil that is, you know, I'm at New York Live Arts right now, so I'm thinking of the soil underneath, right? And we're thinking about pulling it up, and we're also thinking about singing down the walls or moving out the walls or pushing through. You know, these walls aren't so scary, right? But some walls really, 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 really are, right? And all borders are, all colonially imposed borders are. And so how do we move through? How do we push? How do we resist? How do we refuse those borders? Maybe singing through a wall and maybe singing through a border is one way. I mean, there's many, many ways, right? There's many ways to take down the walls and to move.
Is there a choreographed movement? Is there anything, the movement that I see, is it choreographed or is it a ritual movement, improvisational movement? What is the nature of the movement?
It is choreographed as well as structurally improvised. And what I mean by that is we're working with very specific timescales of, I mean, this is something that you won't as an audience necessarily see, but what we are, or you'll see it or you'll experience it, but it's not explicit for you to know, but we are working with a time scale of 3 minutes and a repetition. And it's a kind of a time that never ends, and a repeat. And the performers are also working with different scores that really bring about their, I don't know, sometimes it brings about power, sometimes it brings about some deep frustration, sometimes it brings about some deep maybe channeling of something. Sometimes the dancers are working with this reorienting the cells to justice. Sometimes they're working with different time and death scales in relationship to more than human kin that are not present but used to be present, like the trees that maybe used to be here in the space or where we are now, for example. So there's a lot of so you will yeah, that's what's shared. Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, tell me, so for people who maybe need a little, what would you tell them? What should they come prepared to do? How do they have to approach the work? I know these are kind of academic, but yeah, what should they be prepared for, and maybe what is being asked of them in the performance?
Yeah, I try to always ask for a reciprocity, so that there is an exchange. Like, I do ask for some responsibility of the audience. And I guess in these cases, when we are with Land Celestial, it is to be with us and to be with the ground and to take in the multiple ways that the performers and the trees and the city is asking you to take in. And it's also a way of like being responsible for one another. Anytime we're out in the world, we, you know, how can we be responsible for one another, to these more than human kin? And I guess it's the same really with Inside Outwards. How can we come together in a responsible way to, you know, you're going to witness some really powerful performers who are just like a joy and a thrill to witness. And how might that activate something in you that you want to continue? Well, maybe you want to know about this land a little, maybe more. Maybe you've never understood that this is Lenapehoking. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be in good relationship with Lenapehoking, with Lenape people, with people who have been forcibly removed from here? All right, then what do you do? How do you start your next day?
We have it's one event. I'm not quite sure. Janet Wong was. There's with elders from the Lenapehoking community. What's going on there? Is that a new relationship for you, or is that you had this for a while?
So Being Future Being is generated with these 4, like, so we call them branches. So there's the branch of making, which is all the performers and Raven, the composer, and all the people who are like making the performance. right? And then there's a branch of scholarship, which is Indigenous scholars, Karen Recollet, Joseph M. Pierce, Camille Usher, Dylan Robinson, and myself. And we've been getting together for years, but very particularly with Being Future Being, thinking about kinship making, thinking about the collaborations with More Than Human Trees, thinking, you know, really thinking through this work and how, like, yeah, thinking together and talking together and sharing together and creating new knowledge together. And there's the architecture of the overflow, the branch of action that I talked about, that Ivy that Ivy thinks about, and that is how we engage with local land back and land rematriative efforts. And then there's the branch of knowledge, which is guided by community organizer River Whittle, who's from the Caddo Nation and the Delaware Nation of Oklahoma. So they are Lenape, and they've been organizing and gathering with matriarchs from the other sovereign Lenape nations, and thinking about and planning and thinking about and planning and strategizing, and how they say it is they're building power by gathering together, right? And these are all folks who are coming here coming here to their homelands for the first time. It is in relationship to the show. They also have a whole different agenda while they're here of meetings and places to visit and people to be in community with, as well as them continuing to build power by being together physically here on their homelands. So that is really exciting. That's something that we've been able to build together with River and to help support, because as somebody, you know, as somebody who lives here in the Lenape-Ho-King, it is a pathway in order to be in right relationship with this land. This land needs its people, and the people from this land have been forcibly removed from here. And so how can we, as people who live here, who work here, who have different kinds of access in different ways that many Lenape people don't, how can we try to build pathways so Lenape people can be here to do whatever they want to do?
Right,
and
yeah,
that's land back. Yeah. That's land back too, yeah.
Well, it's really rich, it's generous, and it's challenging. I will be there. I know we're all really honored by it. So I will let you go, my sister. I throw my arms around you, and we look forward to Being Future Being. Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you.